Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October 16th, 2023 meeting of the Finance Committee. Our City Council meeting will start approximately 7:15, and will the City Clerk or our Director of Finance please call the roll?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Tack,
Here.
Chairman Preschlack,
Here.
Alderman Novid,
Here.
Alderman Waldeck is absent, Alderman Notes,
Here.
Alderman Powers,
Here.
Alderman Gashgarian,
Here.
Alderman Weber,
Here.
Alderman Walther.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you so much. First item on the agenda is consideration of minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held back in July 17th, 2023, when it was nice and warm. Anybody have a chance to read them and/or have comments that they want to enter into the record? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Seconded?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Outstanding. The second item is our city mission statement and our fiscal 2025 fiscal policy. Our Director of Finance, Elizabeth Holub, is going to present this, and we do this every year. And take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. This really initiates the start of our 7-month budget process. We start out at the October Finance Committee meeting affirming the mission statement and approving the fiscal year, the City Council fiscal policy for the upcoming fiscal year, which sets really the groundwork or lays the groundwork for the principles on which we build the budget. So included is the city government mission statement. This was originally approved in October of 2013 to be the best managed, fiscally responsible, and appealing community and promote a community spirit of trust, respect, and citizen involvement. Also included in your packet is the proposed fiscal year 25 fiscal policy. We're only recommending one change this year, and it relates to a provision within the revenue guidelines. By way of background, in about 2004, the city, by referendum, created a 0.5% non-home rule sales tax, and that revenue was pledged to the debt service of bonds issued in 2003 and 2004 to make stormwater improvements. When the city became a home rule unit of government, that 0.5% sales tax just moved over as a 0.5% home rule sales tax. In July of 2019, the City Council approved a second 0.5% home rule sales tax, bringing the city's total rate to 1%. At that time, the second 0.5% was placed in the Capital Improvements Fund to continue to fund other infrastructure needs within the city's CIP. With the debt service on the 2003 and 2004 bonds being paid off this fiscal year, the 5-year Capital Improvement Fund forecast set that the 1% home rule sales tax in total would begin to be deposited in the Capital Improvement Fund beginning in fiscal year 25. So we're recommending a change to the fiscal policy to reflect that and show that the full home rule sales tax beginning next year will be deposited into the Capital Improvements Fund. With that, the recommended action is to affirm the city's mission statement and approve the fiscal year 25 fiscal policy. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. It seems pretty straightforward. Anybody have any questions or comments on our city mission statement and our fiscal policy?
No.
Okay, everybody comfortable with that change and the recommendation? Okay, so do we need to do a vote on this, or?
Yes.
Okay, take it away.
So moved.
Second.
All right.
Would you like a roll call vote?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Mayor Tack,
Aye.
Chairman Preschlack,
Aye.
Alderman Novid,
Aye.
Alderman Notes,
Aye.
Alderman Powers,
Aye.
Alderman Gashgarian,
Aye.
Alderman Weber,
Aye.
Alderman Walther.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate the impromptu roll call vote there. So the third agenda item is presentation on our police and fire pension funding update. We had a very productive subcommittee meeting this week, and it's a really, really great story, and we're hoping to get some questions and to present to the public the good news that we have on our 2 pension funds. And take it away, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chairman. This this evening's presentation will provide the results of the actuarial evaluation for both the police and fire pension funds as of April 30th, 2023. The importance of that actuarial evaluation is that it establishes the recommended contribution requirement for the following year, which is the 23 tax levy and the fiscal year 25 budget. The slides here show some historical information on the funded ratio of each plan as well as the investment return. The funded ratio is simply a metric of the total assets in the pension fund divided by the future obligations, the future liability as determined by the independent actuary. And so that proportion of assets to liability is your funded ratio. So as you can see in the last 4 years, the police and fire pension funds have been making steady progress, improving the overall funded ratio of the plans, despite more conservative projections from the actual evaluation standpoint. So that is very good news. On the right side, we show the 4-year history of the investment return on an actuarial basis. The actuarial basis is important because market value investment returns are going to fluctuate significantly from year to year for these plans. And so the actuary uses a method called 5-year smoothing, where gains or losses in any individual year are spread over a 5-year period. And then that combines to create the 5-year actuarial return for each year. So you can see what those actuarial returns were for both police and fire for the last 4 fiscal years. By way of comparison, the city uses 6.5% as the investment return assumption. So you can see that in some years we've fallen slightly below, in other years we've fallen above, but the 6.5 is intended to be an average over time. Several years ago, the city council determined that the current pace of police and fire pension funding in Illinois was not fiscally sustainable. We used the independent actuary at the time to develop a modeler to forecast out for the city council the future contribution requirements to the police pension fund up to the state mandated funding deadline of 2040. We're currently under statute required to have 90% funded ratio by 2040 for both police and fire. In order to achieve that, you can see the blue line was forecasting the contribution requirements of the city in each year to get to that 90% 2040 under the state funding model. The city council, the pension subcommittee was made up of the mayor, the city council finance chair, the city manager, the finance director, and the independent actuary studied significant alternative scenarios to the pension funding in an effort to take a different path that was more fiscally sustainable. So in 2017, the city did a number of things. They updated the mortality table to reflect the longer life expectancy of pensioners who were earning pensions for a longer period of time. Also updated the salary schedule, but most importantly, reduced the payroll growth assumption from 5.5% to 2%. The payroll growth assumption in large part contributes to that ramp that you see of those increased contributions each year, in which we were forecasting that by 2040, the pension fund contribution for police alone would be $7.4 million. So in making those changes that were recommended by the pension subcommittee and approved by the city council, it required significant increases in contributions to both pension funds in the early years, but with the expectation that those increased contributions would have a longer time to earn interest, and thereby we would be able to flatten the line and not have such a significant ramp going up to 2040. So in 2021, we came back and we asked the actuary to run a similar model to see what we had accomplished since the changes in 2017. And what you see here is the previous blue line, the forecasted contributions using the state funding model, compared to the future modeling based on what had been done as of 2021. And so what you can see is that the new line, the red line, showed that In 21, the contribution of 3.3 million compared to a final maximum contribution of 3.9 million. That $600,000 difference over that time period was much less than the millions of dollars in increase we were going to see on the other model. So when we calculated that from a dollar standpoint, in 2021, $3.2 million in increased contributions up front were projected to save Lake Forest taxpayers $25.5 million over the time period through 2040. So we felt very good about the model working and definitely being much more fiscally sustainable for Lake Forest. And so we've looked at these options each year with our independent actuary. This was the second year we used Nyhart. They were new last year. And so when we did switch actuaries, we confirmed with the new actuary that we would be able to continue to do this type of modeling to know that our approach was still working to the best interests of the community. So this is a summary of the 2023 levy or fiscal year 25 budget fiscal year contribution recommendations for police and fire. We do require the actuary to do the statutory minimum contribution. That is a promise we made to the Police and Fire Pension Board so that they could assure themselves that the city's approach was still beneficial in that we were contributing more than the statutory minimum of 90% by 2040. So you can see that as of 4/30/23, the contribution of the statutory minimum would be just under 2.9 million for police, 1.8 million for fire. Alternatively, using the city policy, which is 100% by 2040, and making those changes in actuarial assumptions for a lower investment return and lower payroll growth, the recommended contribution is 3.6 million for police and just under 2.5 million for fire. By comparison, I've just included in the last line the levy amount from last year that is included in the current year's budget, fiscal year 24. That was a contribution of 3.68 million for police, 2.58 million for fire. In discussing this, the city's pension subcommittee had a joint meeting with the Fire Pension Board and Police Pension Board in July where we presented the draft results of the actuarial evaluations for fiscal year 23 and talked about the city's approach and updated modeling for pension contributions. The pension subcommittee felt that it would be appropriate not to reduce the contribution requirement next year, but to instead hold it constant with a 0% increase next year. It would be a slight additional contribution to both pension funds, but that would simply improve the funded ratio and provide a little bit of extra dollars to earn investment income in the future. So the pension subcommittee recommendation was to maintain the same assumptions as 2022, so to retain the 6.5% investment return assumption, continue with the 2% payroll growth assumption. The only change is to reflect a change in the fire mortality improvement based on independent analysis of life expectancy of fire pensioners in Illinois, and that made a slight adjustment to the contribution requirement for fire. And then to maintain the funding at the 2022 levy levels, which are reflected in the fiscal year 24 budget. There was a request by the pension subcommittee to do some additional modeling and look at some opportunities for potential changes in the future approach. And so we did receive some updated modeling from the actuary. We met as a pension subcommittee last Thursday to review the results of this work. And so you're looking here at the police pension fund, and you're looking at 3 lines. The red line shows the projected contribution requirements under the statutory minimum approach, the 90% by 2040. You'll note there's already been some softening of that ramp due to the work that the city has done from 2017 to 2023. But you can see the continued ramp up to 2040, and then a significant drop down to a much lower level in 2041. The blue line is what's called the 15-year open amortization, and that is reflected in the city's pension funding policy currently, in that a 15-year open amortization does not look at achieving a funded ratio by a point in time. It instead says you're going to amortize that unfunded liability by 15 years every year. And so that 15-year open amortization is just going to run into perpetuity. The downside of 15-year open amortization is that you'll never achieve 100% funded status. The modeling showed that you would only achieve 80 to 85%, but you would achieve that and stay there consistently. And you can see also using a 15-year open amortization, it actually projects a decline in contribution requirements over time. The pension subcommittee, in developing the pension funding policy that it currently exists, had looked at the crossover point when the city's current process of 100% 2040 and the 15-year open amortization crossed the line. We would stop at that contribution point and hold it flat going forward rather than reducing it, and that would allow the city to eventually achieve 100%. So we had looked at that crossover point as a finish line, if you will, the last few years. The gray line here is just the 100% by 2040 current policy that the city is using. So you can see that it's projecting a slight increase in contribution requirements up to 2040 and then a significant decrease down as well. So the question posed by the pension subcommittee is, if we instead kept our contributions at the current level, what would that line look like? And ensuring that we would achieve the 90% 2040 that's required by statute. That is the black dotted line. So the actuary indicated that for police at the current funding level, and there's actually a slight increase in 24 and 25, but not much at all. And then holding that constant, we would forecast to be at 91% in 2040, so we would have met the statutory requirement of 90%. Our contributions would drop, but they would not drop by as much after 2040. And then holding that at the reduced level constant, we would achieve 100% in the police fund in 2051. So the pension subcommittee is interested in continuing to examine this model and to see if that is the approach that they would recommend as a change in the funding policy. That would probably come to the city council next year. Since this is just the first year, we thought we would pause, and we had already finalized the actuarial evaluation for fiscal year 23. So this is kind of a nuanced concept. It's a little different than what we've been working with the last few years. But the good news is that it essentially means that the city has reached the maximum contribution requirement for the police pension fund, and would look at level contributions going forward and then potentially a slight reduction in 2040. The reason why the pension subcommittee likes this model is that it tends to equalize the contribution requirements over the time period, so that there's no shifting of responsibility to an earlier generation or a later generation. It's more equitable across the line. If you look at the red line, you can see that we're just, the state funding formula is just pushing that liability down to later years. And so this is a very attractive concept that the pension subcommittee would like to continue to explore. I won't spend a lot of time on fire, but you see similar lines in fire. You can see even a smaller reduction after 2040, achieving the 90% in 2040, and then continuing to move towards 100% based on a reduced contribution requirement. I'll come back and regroup with the recommended changes, but I also wanted to touch on pension consolidation because it is a significant factor here with our funding of public safety pensions. The pension consolidation was legislation that was approved in 2019. It took effect January 1st of 2020, and it mandates on the statewide level the consolidation of only the investment assets of all local police pension funds and all local fire pension funds into two consolidated funds. These funds are independently governed by an elected board of directors, so it operates similar to IMRF in that it is not a state pension plan, but it is an entity that is solely directed to manage those investment assets for the local police and fire pension funds. The statute required the consolidation of investment assets by June 30th of 2022. The Lake Forest Fire Fund transferred their assets in November of 21, and the Lake Forest Police Board transferred their assets in June of 22. So the local police and fire pension funds in Lake Forest are no longer managing the investments of the Lake Forest Fire and Police pension funds. I would note that there is continued litigation. That litigation was by 15 pension funds that found, or their basis of their appeal is that this is unconstitutional, the consolidation, that it's a detriment, it affects their benefits. That has gone through a couple levels of court, but has been found constitutional at all levels thus far. It has gone to the Illinois Supreme Court, and the Illinois Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments, and so those filings are underway by both the plaintiffs and the defendants, and we do not anticipate any outcome from the Illinois Supreme Court before late 2023 or early 2024. So those 15 litigant funds have received a stay and have not been required to transfer their assets to the consolidated fund, and they continue to manage their investments on their own. So the primary purpose of pension consolidation was to enhance investment returns overall for all police and fire pension funds in Illinois. They felt that consolidation would bring economies of scale through reduced investment management fees, but also provide exposure to other investment classes that many pension funds did not have access to. So depending on the assets in your fund, that dictated how much of your assets could be in fixed income versus equity investments. Both police and fire for Lake Forest was above 10 million, so they had the maximum, which was 65% equities, 35% fixed income. But smaller funds under 5 or between 5 and 10 had even more limited exposure to equity investments and had struggled very much in investment returns in this interest rate environment over the last 8 to 10 years. So the table at the bottom just kind of shows some look back on performance. The consolidated funds operate on a June 30 fiscal year. Their investment returns for the year ended June 30th of 2023 net of investment management fees was 8.8% for police and 9.7% for fire. So very, very good investment returns for that consolidated fund, and well above our actuarial assumed rate of return of 6.5%. So that was very good news. But also, as in looking at reduced investment management fees, I've just provided the percentage of investment fees that both police and fire incurred in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23 as a percentage of their asset valuation. Both have shown significant reductions in investment management fees. So the primary purpose of improving investment returns, at least for the first year, is proven and is looking very positive. Also included on this item is your pension funding policy. This was last revised in August of 2020. The policy does indicate that the city will review it at least every 3 years. So as I mentioned earlier, we're not recommending any changes to the pension funding policy at the current time, but it is possible that next year the pension subcommittee would recommend some changes in regards to the modeling and future contributions. We'll continue to monitor the consolidation as well as the long-term modeling with our actuary. So the recommended action this evening is to acknowledge review of and affirm the city's pension funding policy. I will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, it's just great news. It's just another example of how we take fiscal responsibility and stewardship really seriously in Lake Forest. And I just hats off to all the people that I think started in 2015. And I know Mayor Tack was part of it, and former mayors, and Tim Newman and others at Jed Morris as well, that just said, wow, we need to proactively manage our pension obligations to make sure that our police and fire are taken care of, and that we don't crowd out a significant percentage of our operating budget on these payments. I mean, to give you a perspective, the state of Illinois' budget is 51 or 52 billion, and I think probably 26 to 27% is consumed by pension obligations. And that's not even really keeping up with the actually, and so liabilities that accrue over time. And so we've really done a great job as a city, and it's hats off to you, Elizabeth, and your team, and all the volunteer leaders that have gotten ahead of this, that now we're in a position to go, oh, we've achieved our maximum contribution. Now let's figure out what's the best glide path here. Do we want to go really steep down, or do we want to flatten it out to keep it fair across, across generations? And that's a great position to be in, and it's just hats off to all the former leaders and the people on the subcommittees for the pension, and our city council and our mayors. So thank you. Any questions on any of the slides or concepts that have been presented at all? John, yeah, go ahead.
Elizabeth, who's on this board and who elects them?
On the consolidated fund boards? Sure. So the state statute set forth that each of the consolidated boards would be made up of 9 members. And so on each, 3 of the 9 members are active members of a police or fire department. And they are elected from all active police or firefighters throughout the state. So they are elected to those 3 seats. 2 of the seats of the 9 are beneficiaries. So they would be retired members of police or fire pension funds throughout the state, also elected only by beneficiaries. So it kind of carves that out, that they're voted on by their specific subset of stakeholders. The 4 remaining positions are municipal representatives, and so they are, one is statutorily designated as an Illinois Municipal League representative. So Brad Cole, the executive director of the Illinois Municipal League, sits on both boards. And then the other 3 municipal representatives are elected by the municipalities of the state.
And their task is to oversee the consolidated investments.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Would love these firefighters to put a fire out at my house, but are they truly capable of making investment choices in these funds?
So both consolidated funds have hired an executive director and a chief investment officer, as well as other staff that tend to those organizations' daily administrations. But both of them use investment advisors. And so the board does not make those decisions in a vacuum. They do it with the support of the executive director, the chief investment officer, and the investment advisors.
Okay, thank you.
And I take the opportunity to give this plug every time. Elizabeth is too modest to say it herself, but as a reminder of the 3 municipal representatives on the police pension board, Elizabeth is one of them. So we know it's in good hands.
Yeah.
Now I feel better.
Well, yeah, it is professionally managed, and there's short-term and long-term asset allocations, and there's professionals
Ratios
that
that they have to
oversee
follow.
it. And so it is a really good story and real good news. Any other
I just have
comments?
a brief question. Now, that is exclusive of the city of Chicago, correct?
Very good point. Yes, the city of Chicago is
Thank
excluded
goodness.
because it did cover only the downstate pension funds. Downstate is all but city of Chicago. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, that's a longer meeting. Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions on the pension funding? Rich, please.
Just one, if we're going to be coming back to the city council next year to ask maybe for a change in how we travel those various colored lines, right? What do you see as the greatest risks right now in the modeling assumptions that you've made that we should be aware of and start paying attention to?
So I think that is a great question. Investment return is what is going to drive the significant trajectory of those lines. And so I think every year we have to confirm that the consolidated fund is achieving an investment return that meets or exceeds the 6.5% assumed rate of return, or else the chart falls apart. It is the most significant factor in the contribution requirements over the long haul.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I was looking at a sheet on the key assumptions that drive this discussion. And since 2013, our investment return assumptions have gone from 7.5 down to 6.5. So we've been pretty conservative because of the market volatility and some of the market events that you all know about and we've talked through. And so every year, these assumptions are really discussed and understood. And if you lower the investment return assumption, the contribution requirements go up and the funding percentage inherently will go down. So this is all about being thoughtful about the trade-offs and understanding our budget. And then right now, these payments are consuming 4 to 5% of our budget, which is fantastic. It's amazing. And if it stays flat over a period of time, inherently as our budget creeps up, it's going to continually to go down as a percentage. And so we've always embraced very conservative estimates across all of our budgeting, including our pension funds. And I'm leaving in April, so kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I think we want to be very judicious about being optimistic, overly optimistic, and ratcheting things up, given the world we live in. And but that's what the sub-pension committee talks about, and we take it very, very, very seriously. And we have great professionals that help us as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right. Okay. So recommended action is a voice vote, right? There's no roll call?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so everybody comfortable with the direction that we're pursuing? And do I have a motion to acknowledge and affirm our pension policy funding strategy?
So moved.
Seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Outstanding. Now we're getting into the 2023 property tax levy estimate, which is just a portion of our city revenue. It's, I think, specifically 54% of our revenue. And we're going to touch this multiple times. So Director Hollett, please take it away, and thank you.
Thank you very much. So this does begin one of 5 meetings at which you'll consider the 2023 property tax levy. So we're going to start out today with just an overview, not do a deep dive into the levy. We're really just asking for some direction this evening on a non-binding estimate, but it is really the first look at what we're looking at from a tax levy standpoint. So just by way of a little bit of background, there's a few statutes that cover the city's property tax levy. The first is the tree taxation statute, and that has been around for a long time. And all that says under state statute is that any municipality wanting to increase either their aggregate levy or their debt levy by more than 5% over the previous year has some specific requirements to meet in order to do that. And so that is primarily a black box notice in the newspaper and a public hearing held to take formal comment on the tax levy. The second is the Property Tax Extension Limitation Law, or PTEL. And that is also under state statutes. That relates to non-home rule municipalities and other taxing districts. Initially, that law was implemented for the collar counties around the city of Chicago as an effort to reduce the level of property taxes in those collar counties. And what PTEL does is it limits your increase in the levy over the prior year to the CPI or 5%, whichever is lower. And so that does not specifically apply to the city of Lake Forest as a home rule entity. So it's important to distinguish between home rule and non-home rule municipalities. So technically, PTEL does not apply to the city of Lake Forest. Sorry. Thanks. But the city has a self-limiting ordinance, and that was most recently adopted in 2013. It's ordinance 2013-70. In the self-limiting ordinance, the city has set forth certain guidelines regarding the levy and increases from year to year. It has indicated that on the operating levy, it will self-impose the PTEL with the exception of certain criteria. And so in some years, we have exceeded PTEL primarily for the pension funding approach that we just got done talking about. And the self-limiting ordinance also applies to the combination of the capital improvement and debt levies. And that is capped at an inflation-adjusted number that goes all the way back to 2004 and is adjusted annually by the Municipal Price Index, which is released by the Northern Illinois University Center of Governmental Studies and relates to the inflationary increase in public works projects. So we increase that cap each year by that amount. What I've included here on the chart, going back to the 2008 levy, is a comparison of the PTEL in blue and the total city levy increase in orange. So you can see that for the years 2008 through 2012, the city's overall levy was kept at the PTEL, and then you start to see deviations in some of those years between the PTEL limit and the city tax levy increase. Most of those have related to public safety pension funding, but some of them related to increased debt service. And then you can see last year, the city's levy of just under 4% was actually lower than the PTEL limit of 5%. So as I mentioned, this is the first of 5 meetings at which you'll consider the property tax levy. So upcoming meetings are the November 6th City Council meeting. We will present for City Council approval a non-binding tax levy estimate. This is really used for truth in taxation to indicate whether or not we're going to have a 5% increase and need to do the notice and the public hearing requirement. Then on November 13th, that is your Finance Committee budget workshop. So we will have time on the agenda to discuss the property tax levy. That is when we go into the most detail of the levy discussion and talk about the different components. And then we will come back at the November 20th City Council meeting for first reading of the tax levy ordinance, and then back on December 4th for final approval. So before I present the tax levy estimate, I wanted to give a little bit of background information on, again, kind of the history of increases. The chart at the top left is a chart that we presented last year at this time. And we were talking about the fact that a PTEL limit of 5%, which we had last year and we have again this year, is significantly higher than we had seen in a number of years. So the chart at the bottom, that first line, PTEL annual, shows what the PTEL was in all the years from the 2014 to the 2022 levies. So prior to last year, we hadn't seen an increase of more than 2.3% for PTEL going back to 2014. We have historically kept the parks and recreation levies and the library levies at the PTEL limit. So while the city did increase for capital improvements, police and fire pension funding, and debt service, operating levies had generally been capped at the PTEL limit. And so this chart at the top left compared the cumulative increases between 2014 and 2021 to a couple different items. First is PTEL. The cumulative increase was 12.8%. The total city levy had increased by 24.9%. The parks and recreation and library levies had increased by 12.8%, consistent with PTEL. And the compensation plan adjustment, cumulative, had increased by 19.5%. The compensation plan adjustment is the general increase that the council approved each year for compensation adjustments on the salary schedule and pay plan. And so what we could see was that even just increased salaries over that time period had exceeded the levy increases for both Parks and Recreation and Library. So last year, we did recommend a full 5% increase to Parks and Rec and Library levies, although other levy line items increased by less than 5%. The chart at the right, and thank you, Chairman Preschlack, because I do think the pie chart looks better, is the distribution of property tax levy increases from fiscal year 16 to 24. So this says that the increased property tax levies over that time period have been distributed to different purposes, as shown in this pie chart. You can see the largest piece of the pie has gone to capital and debt, with the second closely behind in pensions, whereas the operating levies for the general fund, the library, and Parks and Recreation have taken up a much smaller piece of those increases over time. This slide provides the property tax levy estimate that we're recommending for your consideration this evening. This is aggregated. There are actually more line item components to this levy, and we will look at that on November 13th, but I did want to aggregate this a little bit. What you can see is that the property tax levy of the city is distributed over a number of purposes and a number of funds. And so you can see that by far the majority is the general operating fund levy. The property tax in the general fund represents about 54% of the total revenues of the general fund. We're recommending both the general fund and the general fund IMRF levies increase by 3% instead of the 5% PTEL. As we just saw, the police pension and fire pension levies are proposed for no increase, 0% increase for those portions. Recreation and parks, we are recommending a 5% increase consistent with PTEL as we've been doing for a number of years. The capital improvements levy is going down. That is primarily due to the fact that last year we increased the capital improvements levy by $350,000 to begin the phasing in of the Deer Path Park bonds. We anticipated that was coming, and so we wanted to begin to demonstrate that and show that and phase that debt service into the levy. So that $350,000 is going away appropriately for next year. The library levy, similar to Parks and Recreation, we're recommending a 5% increase. And then the bond funds, you can see that the debt service levy is increasing significantly, just under 50%, due to the addition of the Deer Path Park bond. So those bonds were issued in early 2023. They were issued with a 10-year debt service. The first year's debt service, which is 2023, is being paid from the $350,000 in property tax levy from last year and other revenue sources. So only $350,000 of the current year's debt is being paid from property taxes. Next year, the debt service is $1.27 million per year. We're recommending only a $918,000 levy increase, and so about a third of that debt service would be funded from other revenue sources next year. And what that effectively does is gave us a 3-year phase-in of that debt service. So we took a small part last year, we're taking a big chunk this year, and then next year we'll have the full $1.27 million on the levy. And so that nets out at a $918,000 increase over last year. And then new growth and PTAB, these are additional amounts that aren't levied by the city. New growth is reflective of new construction coming onto the tax rolls for the first year. They get excluded under PTEL. And so this is an estimated amount based on current estimated valuations from the Lake County Assessor's Office. So that is a total of just under $39.5 million, an increase of $1.6 million over last year, a 4.35% increase. So that is lower than the 5% PTEL. And the important note there is that if you exclude the debt service on the Deer Path Park bonds, the levy only increases by 1.85%. So any questions on that, what we'd be looking for this evening is to get your feedback on this initial estimate. Again, this would simply be concurrence by the committee that this is the estimate to bring forth to the city council on November 6th under Truth and Taxation. This would be a non-binding tax levy estimate on November 6th. But it would meet the truth and taxation requirement. I would note that, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but because the debt service levy is taken separate under truth and taxation from the other levy line items, we would be required to do the notice and the public hearing this year because the debt service levy is increasing by more than 5%. Okay, good. Legal agrees.
Yes, this is, it's great news. It's a lot of data and a lot of numbers, but, you know, it's fantastic if you think about the tax levy as 54% of the revenue that comes into the city. It begs the question, at least I asked our director, if you step back and you anticipate capital projects, and we have a capital workshop coming up here in the fall, given all the other sources of revenue and the estimate, are we comfortable that we will have enough revenue to fund all the critical capital expenses that we have? There's, you know, priority ones, and then there's 1Fs that are no funding, 1Fs, and if you remember going through the cycle. And then obviously all of the steady state operating expenses for the people in the general fund. And it was unequivocally that her answer was yes, we do. And so we have this asset coming online with the fields, and our tax levy is going up 1.85%, holding aside the debt service. If you recall, that was a 12 equity 4 debt ratio. That's amazing, right? Fantastic news, because it's going to be a great asset for the community. So any questions on any elements of that presentation? And thank you so much for going through
Yeah,
all that.
I have a question. You said that the limit is either the CPI or the PTEL, and so that begs the question, since we're going to PTEL, what was the CPI?
I think it was 7, but I'm not positive. I know last year was also more than 5%. So inflation for both calendar year 21 and calendar year 22 was both higher than 5%, but PTEL caps at 5.
Okay.
I have one question.
Yes.
This is just the city tax. This gets added into the county, everything on the county collection. Thank you.
Correct. This is just the city levies and combined with the library, it represents about 24% of the total tax bill.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks. So our recommended action is to recommend non-binding 2023 tax levy estimate to be presented at our November 6th city council meeting. Do I have a motion? Seconded?
Second.
Okay, voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, thank you so much. All right, our next item is catch-all other business. Any questions on the flash report? Has everyone logged in and been comfortable with the flash report and how it's organized? I think it's on our website as well. We do a tremendous job of transparency with all of our budgeting and our actuals on our website. And so, you know, thank you for that. Are there any questions on the fee reductions or the waivers granted in the excess of 1,000? Alderman Weber.
Thank you,
Yes.
Chairman. I just had a question. How often do you find, I see there was a residence with a late fee utility bill with no, information to contact them further, or I'm just curious how often that happens.
So not very often, but I would say, if you recall a few meetings back, you approved an agreement with a collection agency.
Yeah.
And so what we are doing now, as we're engaged with them and working through the process, we're trying to clean up some old outstanding invoices. And so we're doing our due diligence of seeing whether we can find forwarding addresses and that kind of contact information. And so this is part of that cleanup, and that we simply had one. This was quite dated, and we just simply couldn't find the organization, and so we had to go ahead and write it off. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. This is an opportunity now for the public to address the Finance Committee on any topics that they may have. Any questions on the charts or the numbers or the tax levy? Okay, hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn our Finance Committee meeting?
So moved.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll take 5 minutes and we'll reconvene for the city council meeting. Thank you.